When the depth of experience is detailed prior to experience rather than open to conjectures, are we not assuring the continuity of a standard of norms to experience? By deliberating the possibility of experience, do we not limit its outcome by defining its characteristics as a measure of its effect, thus limiting its scope? If civilized contexts inhibit human potential beyond acceptable formats, human exploration is stymied to the defined characteristics necessary to recognize it. Perceptual narrowing through an aggregate of lifetime conditioned experiences is developed from a perspective from which individuals both derive yet limit their abilities to make distinctions beyond those they recognize. Consider that an open mind can easily be swayed into believing it accesses its potential as choices from distinguishing prospects, rather than from an unquantifiable unknown from which diverging potential could be induced. Could such a mind discern its dependency on recognizing aptitude born out of a range of possible delineated choices circumscribed by perceptual norms into a defined focus, with consequential limitations to perceptual abilities it has yet to discover due to constraints not yet evident from that chosen perch? Hence, to merely say there are many approaches from which to perceive a single point transcribes a conditioned narrative which outlines an approach towards possible choices and measurable outcomes defined by linear linguistic prescriptions. While postulated into a sentence of terms to be understood within socio-cultural routines, this approach is mentored through socialization, education, and the measure of our experiences. In other words, a conditioned narrative with grave and tragic perceptual consequences during which no one takes responsibility and where everyone yields unconditionally to the strategic limitations they are made to experience. Are language constructs not derived from limited contextual references maintained through plausible narratives and relationships set in a linear timeline? They need to be, or we cannot converse, understand, or explain. Alternatively, the norm within a society's historical, cultural, societal narrative provides a defined, plausible context to what's possible and impossible, from which we channel our explanations and understanding. What makes sense, what we believe, who we think we are, human possibilities and human limitations and more refine the very patterns of present human engagement into identifiable, anthropomorphous designs. But in the process, what are we doing? Most people accept their perceptual habits automatically, and they operate their worldly avatar without ever suspecting the enormous potential available to them. This potential is not tangible in the way we usually look at things. Most people see potential within the context of being able to get rich or do well in sport or in business, which is a contextual potential. Potential here does not covet social or material standing, although curiously such things can be included without attachments. The evolution of limitless potential, for its own sake, can be a game changer. Student potential to this day is not in the conversation in mainstream education circles, since selective filters derived from standards, cultural norms, and perceptual conditioning enforce a competitive, if not elitist, program of study. Elitist is a word that enlists its opposite, such as egalitarian. But this is a conundrum, since learning at its best is neither elitist nor egalitarian. However, you will find many educational experts caught up in linguistic perceptual traps. Potential today has been misdiagnosed as a derivative of training from an outside agent or personal effort because it has been quantified through assessments to a nominator which has social value, yet potential in its most authentic form cannot be quantified because it is an unknown. What is a human being's unadulterated potential? We socialize, culture, educate, and in the process condition and mold children without addressing the existence of a genuine potential because we really don't know what it is. The term potential today is converted into an ability to perform as in sports or to mean the possibility of achievement, dictionary.com, and immediately, without hesitation, many of us will automatically translate achievement into mainstream socio-cultural economic frame of references. Potential or grades, wealth, access, financial rewards, nominal trinkets flaunted as social justifications such as car types, name brand clothes, house locations, degrees on office walls, and numerous other displays of status we are taught to have, want, need, and consider important as landmarks to our social development. With all the other associated cultural denominators which fit into the construct of potential as we want it to mean, as we mean it to be. A cultural transaction of possibilities developed into financial or social expressions of conditional well-being expressed as success. But what of the other potential, the one which endures beyond cultural norms and meanings, and which exists as an undiscovered, unfamiliar, and yet to be identified possibility? The potential of human beings when they are not predisposed to any type of cultural norm that binds their self-reflection into a limited definition of prospects and self-identity. What of that potential? Authentic human potential neither seeks or gets idealized or revered, since it does not address itself to social distinctions and values as understood by others who are manipulated by the norm and rewards outside of itself. And since human potential, in its most authentic form, can only be defined in terms of what it's not, could we look for expressions and possible attributes of this type of potential outside of the realm of automatic referencing to known variables we have already conceptualized and characterized? And most importantly, how does that relate to children at school and to babies and parenting? And from the context of moving from the predictable to the unanticipated, it could mean something extraordinary. To what degree does confrontational authority conflict, inflict damage, and suppress a child's identity immersed in a preconceptual reality from birth? While many children before the age of 3 mirror mostly a preconceptual reflection of self, what are the consequences of structured behavior patterns to a child's natural inquisitiveness bound for an intrinsic motivational relationship in life? In other words, are we guiding our children or berating them into submissive behavioral patterns which will inhibit or mark them for the remainder of life? Consider the possibility, if not the likelihood, that most humans live in a colonized state. They are domesticated, herded by the demands of worldly affairs in which they compete for a self-reflection by satisfying extrinsic motivational wants and needs, upheld by standards of society and ruled by leaders created by, and who maintain predictable allegiances to, constituents of the norm. Constituencies of the norm are conditioned to be controlled by the terms and contexts through recognition, explanations, preferences, habits and dislikes, etc. They populate and are subservient to historical, social, cultural, or other influences by background formulated through both edificial constructs and normative contexts no longer seen as out of the ordinary. These humans roam contexts and constructs elemental to a reality out to subjugate willing participants who, on automatic, will defend and closely guard characterized predispositions they identify with. Perceptual narrowing through an aggregate of lifetime conditioned experiences is developed from a perspective from which individuals both derive yet limit their abilities to make distinctions beyond those they recognize. As such individuals, we develop the position from which we translate and transmit the extent of our awareness by interacting within the range of experiences conducive to the states we acknowledge others as ourselves. Shared realities which require such imposition. As we interact through chosen or preferred mediums, we range within a given spectrum in line with the nature of a disposition compelled to stay within the boundaries of the standards of the times, within the periphery of what is known, accepted, understood. As willing participants, are we capable of recognizing this subservience as such, as our attention, captured by context, prioritizes a conduit to daily, normal living, a shared perceptual reality, a collusion amongst others like-minded as ourselves? And what's the alternative? On a more mundane level, consider this, and that may sound crazy. A mind who blindly follows any narrative, no matter how much it makes sense, is repeatedly mentored, if not captured, into a monodimensional perspective from which disinvolvement can be an exhaustive affair. Explanations, thinking, or essentially any narrative spawn a subtle and complicit agenda into a hidden directive that objectified cognitive acuity or reasoning exposes us to the only reality available, comprehensively explained. Text language may no longer offer a suitable medium from which to challenge unknown experiential contexts and constructs, as language is the glue to normative engagements which asserts formative patterns whose principal context is too inflexible to be the mainstay to unexplored possibilities. Humans are mysterious and magical beings, born into a world out to control their self-reflection. Okay, here is another way of looking at it. We think certain ideas represent us, and so we are moved to defend them. But it is really the other way around. We must defend ourselves from any ideas which force us to misrepresent who we really are. These ideas and belief systems and the background context which force us to act so as to protect their preeminence exploit an elemental prerogative to our perception. We are directed as participants that limits our involvement to characteristics we are trained to recognize. We live in contexts because as trained participants we cannot live outside of them. Judgments, actions, interests, thoughts, everything about us is generated to create a stable platform and define a common, easily recognized, pliable identity within a matching ecosystem in which meaning becomes supportive attributes. Humans relive the same type of experiences over and over again in the name of economic gains, stability, religious fervor, and nationalism. Humans are made to live inside an understandable and recognizable matrix, and language and its derivatives coerce them into it. In the 1960s, NASA conducted a study on geniuses. Dr. Land discovered that at age 4 and age 5, 98% of children are creative geniuses. Only 2% of those kids remain geniuses as adults. The school system was blamed for the decline in creativity. Peak intelligence and autonomy, self-reliance is the natural human state of participation. Teach2learning.com. Come and visit us. Copyright 2020 and 224.